So let's start with the basics. The purpose of this is really to demystify the jobs within filmmaking and within the filmmaking process. And as a composer, what we want to do is run through today how it works and what it's like, and particularly on a what do you do all day basis. But let's start with some obvious questions. How do you define the role of composer? What is it?
Well, I suppose if you were describing it in an encyclopedia of sorts, I suppose they call it media composer. I mean, obviously a composer is someone who writes music just writes music. But I think it has a kind of air of formality about it, which is not deserved in terms of like film composition. Because I think the idea is that when you hear the word composer, people have an idea about someone who's kind of slightly more wizened or serious. And basically, it's writing music. You write music. That's what you're doing. But when you write music for media, that's either it could be games or TV or film or plays, theatre, musicals. You become, I suppose, a sort of musical dramatist. You become part of the storytelling process, and it's that odd thing is that it does the job of when words don't do it. It's like when in a musical they say when someone can't say the things and they have to sing them. It's when words won't do the job enough. And I think it's slightly different with film or TV because not only do you kind of have to get underneath every character's like characterization and the reasons why they do things and feel things, but you also have to kind of seed plot points and join things together and make sense of things where needed. And sometimes I always think it's like you're holding someone's hand musically. You are guiding them through the process of watching a storyline, a linear storyline generally, and you are squeezing it a little bit when you want them to feel safer. You are guiding them in places, and sometimes you're misleading on purpose to make something else feel more dramatic. But it's getting under the skin of it in a way. And I always feel, I like melody, I'm a big fan of melody. And I think if I can try and define a show or a film in a single piece, so when you hear it, somehow you get the sense of what the piece is without knowing anything about it, then I think that's half the battle. The next part of the battle is how do I make that stick to what's in front of me? Because I can write a melody which feels like it's about pirates or detectives or spies or something, but if someone is walking from there to there to there to there and things are happening to them, you need to be able to paint that emotionally, or viscerally through music, and that's the kind of craft side. So in a way, there's two sides. There's the kind of creative side is like, what is this music going to be? What's this going to sound like? Is it going to be sort of jazz? Is it going to be orchestral? Is it going to be vocal? Is it going to be acoustic? Is it going to be electric? What's the overall thing? And then what's the music going to be? Is it going to be melodic? Is it going to be atonal? Is it going to be dissonant? Is it going to be ugly? Is it going to be beautiful? Is it going to be refined? And that's that part of it. And then it's like, how is this going to stick to the pictures? How's it going to glue itself and do this job of leading us through the drama and hopefully delivering you at a place where, as it's a team sport, everyone feels satisfied at the end.
That's the most beautiful definition of that job I've ever heard. That's really fantastic.
Well, we could leave it there.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So let's talk about where you start. When you join a project, tell us about those first conversations and those first thoughts, and how you come to start the process of thinking about scoring something.
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is choose your job wisely. I read a script, because sometimes if it's a story that I either don't like or I don't connect with, then there seems to be little point in engaging with it, because unless you can engage with it, then you're not going to be able to write for it. And I suppose it's like an actor, it's like you read a part, you think, I can really picture myself playing that. For me, if I read a script, if I start hearing music, I think, well, that's there's some hope there for something creative to happen. So that's the first thing, is do I like the script, right? The second thing is who's in it. I did a film, I was given a script once for a big Hollywood film that was at that point had Harrison Ford attached to it. And it was a story about cloning. Very interesting start to this story, it's like a really engaging opening sequence, that Harrison Ford's character goes home from his day at the office and he puts the key in the door and he notices through the window of his own front door, the front of his house, he sees himself in his house with his family. And I think that's a really fascinating start to a thing, right? And it was about the morals of cloning. Something had happened, and he works at a cloning factory or something like that. Anyway, so they had accidentally created a version of him. So that then increases the idea of there's an existential question about that, about who is the real person. If you are cloned, then that's all your memories and your experiences as well. So who actually is the main character? I thought this was really interesting. And then a couple of weeks later, I think Harrison Ford dropped out and they cast Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, without changing a word of that script, that's a very different movie. And that's whether, so that's important, who's in it, And then the third one is do I like the people that I'm going to be working with? Because for a few months, you're going to be spending a lot of hours, 7 days a week, working for and with people. And I think people is the most important part of it, and the relationship part of it is the most important part. And if I don't like the people that I'm working with, and hopefully they like me as well, but if that's not there as well, that can feel like it might stunt some of the work. But for me, it's like the experience of doing it. That's all I've got control over, is what am I doing, what am I choosing to do. Because if I do a movie that opens up on a Friday night and 10 million people see it around the world, I don't get to partake in that experience. I'm at home watching MasterChef or something. And we don't get gold-plated cars sent to bring us to photo shoots and stuff like that. We are behind the camera people. So how do I start? Is I do those things, and if that's all a yes, I generally let the idea of it percolate for a while. And because I like melody, I tend to try and come up with something which is a thematic core. With the Bonds, it's a song. I think traditionally my favourite part of it is always how the song sort of resonated and repeated itself in the score, and that's for me, that's the most important thing. And when I'm playing music for the first time for a director and a producer, I'll always ask them just to say a very simple thing when I've played it to them for the first time, and this is related to the two worst sounds in the world. Right, the second worst sound in the world is when you play a director a new piece of music, the gap between the end of that piece of music and them saying something, that vacuum of possibility, where it could be the worst thing or the best thing that's ever happened, that is awful, right? And to that end, I always say to a director, could you just say that you love it? Right? You can spend the next hour telling me about what's wrong with it, but you come away from that going but you loved it, but we just need to change it a bit. And, that's okay. But that also then leaves, obviously, the worst sound in the world is televised golf. I don't know if you've ever, when that bit when they hit the ball from the green, they have the big stick at the front, right? And and the camera goes up in the air, and you're looking at sky, right? and you can't see a thing. And then the ball comes down, and the camera drops down again, and you can't see anything. And then you see green, and you can't see anything. And then you just hear a little round of applause or something. That vacuum of nothing is the worst sound in the world. And I think it's the worst sound in the world because it means that it's Saturday afternoon and you can't go out and play, so you're watching golf on the television. It's not really a direct answer.
No, but it's a fascinating insight. You've never felt tempted to compose a sting just for that duration, for all golf?
I think it's particular of BBC, and I think it's the BBC old school analog compressors that they use to make everything sound lovely and warm. And I don't know if you've noticed, this has nothing to do with music, but with outside broadcast stuff, there is a difference in sound between ITV and BBC. And I don't know if that's because BBC have still got ancient old analog compressor stuff, which just sound nice and, slightly distorted and dirty, but lovely. And maybe ITV have got cleaner microphones, I don't know. But I prefer the sound of nothing on BBC than ITV.
I'm glad we've cleared that up today.
That's a headline.
Yeah, that's for the internet. So you join a project, you've read a script, you're starting to maybe get a melody in your head, and then the next process of that, are you at that point, how early do you like to come onto a project? Ideally, what's your experience been of, because it can be at any point, and then what are you, beyond that first melody, how are you then growing that and iterating that into larger pieces?
I used to have a theory that you can write from the script, right? Now, I've been encouraged occasionally to do that, and I've always slightly regretted it, because I'm reading the script and in my head I'm seeing a film that is on the page. Now that's not the film that you as a director would be seeing, or whoever it is I'm working for. They have a version of this film in their head which isn't the same one that I've got in my head, which is why they're the director and I'm the composer. So I then see footage and I'm going like, well, if I'd have known he was going to do it like that, I'd have never written that. If an actor has something that he's created with a character which makes me look at them in a completely different way, rather than just the things that they say. Sometimes the way that they've decided to look or talk or act or move or dress, or the way that their hair and makeup's been done, it makes you think differently about how they are and what's their internal world and truth. And so I think that's a bit of a trap. So I like to see stuff. When I did Quantum of Solace, the director wanted me to write stuff in advance of the show, and I didn't want to write it just on the script because for all those reasons. So I asked him if he could send me kind of character pieces, like don't send me anything that they're saying or cut scenes, but let me just see how people look and how they move and how they look at each other and how they interact. It doesn't have to make sense in terms of a drama. I just want to, if I'm writing for someone, like this is who they are, I know why I'm doing this job, because when I see something, I hear music. Right? The worst thing you could say to me is do whatever you like. I did a concert for the first ever concert piece was it was the Royal Albert Hall's 150th birthday, and they commissioned me to write a concert piece for it, which I'd never done. And they said the dreaded words, you can do whatever you like. Now, if I was going to do whatever I like, I would have done it already. But I see something and I hear music. Okay. Yeah. Now, there was nothing to see, really, if you're writing about the Albert Hall's 150th anniversary. So I went into their archives and I found everything that had ever happened in the Albert Hall. And I found the hand drawings for the design of the dome and if ever you're there, I think in row K, seat 17, you'll be sitting on top of the foundation stone that Queen Victoria set. The dome, the famous dome, was manufactured out of iron in Manchester. And it was then disassembled and brought to London by horse and carriage, and then reassembled in parts, in bits, on the roof, where there was a massive hole, obviously. It became the roof, and it was put on chocks around the rim of the Albert Hall roof. And then they knocked the chocks out one by one with hammers until the thing settled, and then they bolted it on. And the drawings for that were absolutely exquisite. Obviously it was just pen and ink, hand drawn. That kind of artistry was really quite extraordinary. So I could see that, and so I thought what I can do is I can kind of chapterize, in a way, make a little film for myself about the history of the Albert Hall. So the first movement was going to be the conception and the building and the opening, and then we were going to do a section about all the sports things that had happened there for the first time ever. It was the world's first indoor tennis happened there. It had the world's first indoor marathon. It was in 1927, I think, something like that, and it was Italy versus England. 2 people, 527 times around the stores. And the Italian lost because you forget that when you are running in a circle, you are constantly on a camber. And so his inside leg gave up, because it's like you're always running in a circle the wrong way. Anyway, so we won that. And there's a lot of firsts that happened in there, and they had all the Chelsea Arts Club dances. They had the suffragette movements. Winston Churchill gave a lot of his war speeches from there. They banned rock and roll after the Who had played there. I think the staff complained that they didn't like the fact that people were swearing, so they banned rock and roll from the hall for a long time. Anyway, so slightly off subject, but I had to create something that I felt I could see and like tell a story, and then write all these sections for it. So the idea of how you do it is largely dependent on the subject matter and what you've got. But to answer the question, if I'm trying to remember it correctly, was what do you do then? I will, if I think I have a defined version of what I think the music should be, I will what we call like demo it up, right? You do a demonstration of it. Now it used to be, in the old days, very old days, that you would sit down with a piano and a director would come in and you would go like, here's this bit, and that's for them, and here's this bit, and that's going to be for them. And they wouldn't hear anything until they got to the recording studio. There's a great clip of Alfred Hitchcock talking about Bernard Herrmann, and he was saying about how much he hated film composers because they'd sit there on a piano and go, this is going to be horns, this is going to be flutes. He goes, and then you get to the recording session and you hear it and you go like, maybe I don't know if I like that or not. And you go, it's too late now. We're all, we paid for it. They're all we've got to do. We've got to get it out of the way. But nowadays you have to play everything almost to the finished thing. We have sample libraries, which are sort of electronic versions of real instruments that you can make something which sounds pretty close to the finished thing. And so that means that the job has almost become twice as difficult because you then have to make something sound incredibly realistic rather than have the faith in I'm going to play these themes and you're not really going to hear it until you're sitting in front of the orchestra recording it, which can be quite traumatic, not least because you're probably spending about £1,000 a minute to have an orchestra in a big recording studio. So if you're taking 10 minutes to rewrite something because someone didn't like it, that's a lot of money down the drain. So the next thing is trying to get a demo, which means everyone's happy with what it is that we're writing and then ultimately recording it. But the craft is making it stick. So then you've got weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of trying to make it fit. And obviously if it's a film, they're going to be changing it, they're going to be cutting it, they're going to be shortening scenes, lengthening scenes. When I did Casino Royale, that film starts with a big chase, a sort of African chase in a building site and all sorts of things. When I saw that, which was the first thing that I saw, it was 17 minutes long, and it represented around about 20% of the entire score in that one sequence, which feels like horribly intimidating just because of the amount. Not only the amount, but also if you think about it, the amount of notes. If I'm writing a minute of action music, that's a lot more notes than writing for the same amount of time. So it's like, it's going to take me 10 times longer to write a minute of action music than it is of a love theme. So there are things like that you have to think about. It's like, and also that means that this piece of music is going to be 300 pages long. How do you get it so you can if you're putting a part in front of a violin player and there is a really tricky violin part, which you've got to gauge the way that it is printed so it can be played. Because if you happen to have a page turn in the middle of a tricky so you've got to think about all those things as well. So yeah, there's a lot to think about other than wistfully, mincing about, thinking about, how artful, am I writing music, walking along the top of a hill, and it's like you've got to think of all that boring stuff as well.
And so talking about the sort of the collaborative or the team nature of it, the sense of having a number of teams that you're dealing with. So first of all you're dealing with maybe the director, the producers, possibly even the studio on a big movie, in terms of any feedback they're giving you, and then also you're having to work with a huge orchestra as well. So you're continually interfacing with a number of other people to discuss and present your work. And how do you deal with that? Do you have a big team around you to sort of take a lot of that load away? How do you do it?
No, I've kept it very tight as a little group. I mean, I've only ever worked with like one or two people at the most at any one time. Certainly for the first sort of 20 years, just me and an orchestrator I would sort of do what they call the sketches, which is like it's called a 10-line sketch, where you would have the bulk of here's the trumpet part, here's the horn part, here's the violin part, and then an orchestrator would then break that down. So this is the first trumpet part, this is the second trumpet part, this is the third trumpet part. So it's, you kind of break it down like that. Some people do both, it's fine, but a lot of the time just the time pressures of having to turn this stuff around fairly quickly, and sometimes in a film that's 2 hours long, sometimes you've got 90 minutes of music. It's a lot from a standing start, and again, if there's a lot of action music, it's a lot of notes. But no, I tend to just have the orchestrator and everything, and sometimes a programmer as well, like for electronic elements, to get things like that going. But so you have to kind of manage a little team of people, because it's not only in the digital world. I mean, it's weird how much it's changed since I've started, right? It only seems like yesterday when I started, but in those days we were recording to tape. So you would have analog tape, right, magnetic tape on a great big 2-inch reel, like you do, you see in all documentaries about music, and the little meters that go up and down, and the reels would go round. And if you were working with an orchestra, you'd need 2 of those. They'd need to be locked together. There is like a 25-second gap where they have to lock together in order to be in sync with each other, and they then have to chase what was then a video machine, which was driving everything, so it worked with the picture, so where you're recording something in time with the picture. That's all computerized now. It used to be, when you had a music editor, what a music editor does is when the picture changes, they have to cut the music so it fits properly. But they're also in charge of creating what they call click tracks. Now, you might have seen, orchestras working with headphones on sometimes. It's not just to hear what they're doing and maybe what the rhythm section are doing at the back of the hall, where they can't always hear it acoustically. But in order for music to stick to a picture, so if someone walks from here to over there and 5.5 seconds and 15 frames in, they trip up, and you want to put a little piece of music for where they trip up, for instance, you've got to time that so it's exactly the same time. And in the old days, you used to do that by punching a little hole in the magnetic soundtrack of the film. So you'd have the picture and you'd have the soundtrack on another tape, and they would cut a little hole in it, and every time it went across the playback head, it would bump. So the tape would go across it, and every time there was a hole, it would go bump. Now, you know that it's running at 24 frames a second through a projector, which means that every other second is going to create a certain rhythm. And they used to have these Bibles of like how far the holes in the film had to be cut in order for it to make a bump, which was the right tempo for what you're doing. And they would carry around what looked like large kind of coffins, which were full of sticks with spikes on that were a certain distance apart, and you would lay the film onto this thing, punch the holes in at that tempo, and when you play the picture back, it would go click, 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 and that's the tempo that you would record in order to get to the trip down there at that bar. Obviously, if you change tempo, then you've got to physically cut tape together. This is all gone now, so it's all now digital, it's all computers, and you can get through so much so quickly. But it used to take forever to record stuff, because by the time everything sunk up and you needed to do it again, it would be a minute before you could start again. And not only that, but you'd run out of tape, so then you'd have to, you only get like 15 minutes on tape, but now it's like almost everything's infinite. And I think it's the same with shooting, isn't it? You know, it's like now everyone shoots on digital equipment, so you don't have to worry about what they call the clapper loader guy, who actually has to put film in a can, and unless you're using film.
So then, as you're going through now, and as you're making your way to having a completed score written, at what point are you feeling, or at what point are you presenting that score to director, producer, studio, and then what feedback and how you deal with notes? Just talk a little bit about that process.
Well, I can tell you how it's changed as well. Like, so back from going back to like Stargate, for instance, right? So I was writing that. I was in America in a hotel room doing that, and this was before equipment is as advanced as it is now. So it was quite basic in those days. I think at the start of that process, I read a script, I had a meeting, and I really didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't know what I was doing. I was flown out to meet with the director and the producers of Stargate, and considering that the last film I did, the first film I did was written, I was sitting on the end of my bed with a sort of home computer, and that's all the equipment that I had. So they said, well, we want you to come out to Los Angeles and meet this director. And I'd read in Premiere magazine, I think, one of the film magazines, about how screenwriters pitch ideas to studios. And I think the idea is you suggest that this thing is like something else which has been very successful. And then you think of two things that are very successful and say it's a bit like that. So I thought, well, I'll adopt this approach because I didn't know what I was doing. So I went out and I said, like Stargate, I said, I think it's like Lawrence of Arabia meets Star Wars. I think that's what it is. And it sort of is, you know, it's like...
It's a good pitch.
Anyway, so then I came back and I wrote, they said, would you do it? And I said, yes. So I wrote a kind of theme which I'd sent out to them and they liked. I think they only saw about 2 different pieces of music that entire time. I was there for about 4 months, 5 months. And I just played them a few ideas. I said, this is the sort of thing I'm thinking for this bit. And we were all on the plane then, so 6 months later, we're on the plane coming back to record this this whole score, which was like 100 minutes of music. And Roland Emmerich was on the plane, and he realised when he was on the plane that he hadn't heard anything, and I think he had a bit of a moment where it's like, well, if we don't like this, we're really stuck because we booked 7 days recording with a full orchestra, and I don't know if I like any of it. I mean, luckily he did, but I mean, so there's a risk involved in that, you know. And now with the equipment that we have now, I kind of have to basically produce a version which is as finished as possible to the finished thing without it being real people for every single piece of music in a show. So on a daily basis, I would have to conceive of, compose, arrange, and then produce a version of the finished thing which would need to be approved by if it was with Chris, for instance, like he would have to okay it, and the producers, other producers or broadcasters would have a say in what they think it is, and you would get notes, and you would have to either choose to address them, not address them, or state your case as to why you did what you did. I mean, I've got a basic rule of thumb with that, is that I like writing music, so if someone asks me to write more music, then that's fine. I like writing music. I also have a reason why every note is there, and I think that's important if you are a composer, to have a reason why everything is there, because if something's there that isn't serving a purpose, then you probably don't need it and it shouldn't be there. So I could explain to you, like for instance, if you came to me and said there's this cue, and you say like, I'm not sure why this is like this here, I will be able to have a conversation with you about why I did that. And it might be that at the end of that, you don't like it, and that's all it is. You know, you might understand the reasoning behind it, but you might just not like it, in which case I'll go away and do something different. But sometimes I've had it where the director said, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, and you know, it leads you to a slightly different occupation. I don't think there's any point, like if I was in a restaurant and I ordered something and it came out and I didn't like it, and I don't really like this, I don't think if the chef came out and told me all the reasons why I should like it, isn't going to make me like it. I'd rather he just went off and made me something that I wanted. So yeah, that analogy.
Great.
I'm a non-disgruntled Gordon Ramsay.
So then you record with your musicians, and then the score goes on to the picture. Do you want to talk a little bit about the process of a mix and a final mix of a movie or a TV show, and explain to people how that works and what that is?
And it's not always orchestra, by the way. I mean, like a lot of times with like TV work, there's not really the budget for full orchestra, and not only that, but it's not always appropriate that you're going to have a full orchestra. So pretty much all the TV stuff that I've done has had orchestral elements, like Sherlock and Good Omens I tend to work with just string sections for that, and everything else is what we call fakes. It's just me playing it on synths and things, or samplers, or guitars, or whatever it is. So I'll do all that, and then we'll go into the studio and just record the string stuff. And having real people involved in any of this thing always makes it better. I do think that, I mean, I've done concert versions of those scores, and I don't think they always benefit from being fully realised in an orchestral way. There's something about the character of it. You know, TV's an interesting thing. Whenever I've been out with people who are in films, when you walk past, right, sometimes people will recognise them. Like if it's Pierce Brosnan or something, they might go, oh, it's Pierce Brosnan, it's Pierce Brosnan over there. Right? But if it's someone from the telly, hey! It's like, you feel like there's a sense of ownership with people who are in your front room. You know, it's like, if you think about it, when you watch a movie, you are in this room with 800 people, hopefully, who are hopefully being quiet and watching it. You have this kind of agreement as a crowd that you are going to enjoy this thing, and everyone's 70 feet tall. But they're that big when they're in your front room, and also you can switch it off and go to the toilet and come back. You know, it's a very, very different, intimate kind of relationship that you have with people on the telly. And so sometimes that sort of smaller approach, a more, in a way, human approach of less people, makes it slightly more accessible, I think, because there is a formality to a symphony orchestra, and there's something that I think when you're doing it in concert, you always try and break that down a little bit, because everyone feels that when you go to a symphonic concert, you have to be sort of well behaved and quiet and respectful. And certainly, to a certain extent, it's nice if you do, but you don't have to, especially if it's film or TV music. But there's something about the sound of people performing. The humanity of that is the thing that informs it. And sometimes when you have a piece that is where you can hear a player, you immediately feel the person at the other end of that performance. If you've got 25 people playing exactly the same thing, it's like a solo person, someone who is singing by themselves, and a choir who are singing exactly the same thing, but there's 100 people doing it. It's a different sort of form of language. TV's intimate, like radio, you know, it's kind of, you're in people's houses, and it's very different. So once you've recorded all this stuff, right, so you've got a whole bunch of stuff, then you have to, what they call, mix it. Now, you mix it because you're a team, right? Now, what I'm doing is no more important than the lighting, or the script, or the sound editing, or the costume. So I always mix the music, I balance all the different parts of the music so it fits the show, right? Now, it's not about me, it's not about the music. The show is the king, the film's in charge, we serve that. That's the only reason this music exists. Now, if you've written it properly, then you don't need to do that much mixing, because you've written it so it stays out of the way of the important sound. So if there's dialogue, you're not going to be going bam, bam, bam all the way through it. So then you have to drop it. It's stupid. The same with an action sequence. I learned very early on, if I see a helicopter, don't bother writing the music. You will not hear a thing. So you kind of write in and out of the action and the dialogue. And so by the time you put it up, you should be able to keep it fairly level, and it should just about work. But you sweeten it, you make things sound better, you know, you can tweak things. And then you deliver it to the soundstage, and the guys then have to mix it. And this is when it gets really tricky, because I don't go to dubs. Right? It's when they dub in the film. It's when, I've been a few times, and you go in and you've got your music editor who's sitting there with your score on a computer, and then you've got 17 other computers. That one's got footsteps, that one's got bullets, that one's got dialogue, that one's got sound effects, that one's got ambient noise, that one's got the creaking of a leather jacket, you know, and they're all fighting for a kind of space, an audio space, and to be noticed, because they've all worked really hard on it, and they're, you know, it sounds amazing. But, you know, this is a long way from a stereo microphone. I mean, if you ever watch critically, sound-wise, older films, there's vast amounts of silence in it. You know, people didn't bother doing things like footsteps, and if you sit down, your leather jacket would creak. You know, it'd just be silent, you know, and there'd be dialogue, and there wouldn't be music absolutely everywhere, and you wouldn't be able to hear birds outside and cars in the distance and a dog somewhere or a passing plane. It just wouldn't bother. But now it's everywhere, and everything has a sound world designed for it. So there's a ton of stuff to try and balance. So if you write the music properly, hopefully it will sit in amongst all that, but you've really got to be aware of it. So when I'm writing, I get the sound guys to send me their temporary recordings, so I know what I'm dealing with. Because otherwise, I mean, I did a movie once, and I did this big piece of music for Summit, and all I could hear was a truck driving past. And it was an off-screen delivery of something that I didn't know was there until I saw it in the cinema, you know, because no one told me, oh, by the way. Anyway, so sometimes you're taken by surprise a little bit, but you know, we do our best.
It's a great overall summary of everything. As a person, for people who might want to go into this field, what are both the skills and the personality traits you need to be a composer?
I think there will be an assumption. Is anyone here interested in doing this job, by the way? Any students or say young people? You don't have to be young.
Somebody put their hand up. Well done.
Someone's admitted it.
Yeah.
People will assume, rightly, hopefully, that when you try and get into this job, that you know how to write music, right? They will assume that you can write music, in the same way that if you go to audition for a part in a film, they will assume that you can act. You know, it's not just something you fancy doing. So there's an assumption that you can write music, and there's an assumption that you can write music to picture. You know the mechanics that are involved in creating music that is going to be delivered, that they can mix into a film, and you can deal with all the aspects of it. Everyone thinks everyone, you've got a room, 100 people, all after one job, they can all do it. So, and I think this is true of most jobs, really. It's like then it's really down to personality. And I would say that this job is probably 90% sort of psychological. 90% is dealing with people and learning how to talk to people and really listen to people, and you know, because the amount of different personalities involved is incredible. I did a film once with Rod Michel's no longer with us, but the studio wanted a score which was completely diametrically opposite to what the director wanted. And the director's message to me was, I don't want to hear any of that shit that the studio are asking for. I don't want to hear anything like that. This was Paramount as well. Anyway, and then the Paramount head of music would then phone me up and go like, we don't want to hear any of that shit that the director's asking me to do. Like, don't want to let anywhere near this film. So I made the mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was, again, this is part of the thing about it being sort of diplomatic and political and psychological. I said, I'll see if I can do something which pleases both of them, which is the worst thing you can do. So I wrote this piece of music which kind of took into account everyone's comments. And the director came in and he sat down and played it to him. And he said, that sounds like 17 other films, none of which I want to see. Which I thought was brilliant. And he phoned up the studio and said, listen, David's got enough voices in his head already without yours, so can you leave him alone? And we went on and we did it the way that he wanted to do it. But, you know, that's not untypical, you know, for to have kind of contradictory opinions about what things should and shouldn't be. So it's like, well, how do you deal with that? You know, how do you speak to people and listen to people and understand people and try and, I guess like a director has to do, you know, like with actors who might have slightly different opinions about how things should go, how do we massage this so you get it the way that you know you need it to be without upsetting everyone? I think good producers are incredibly useful in those instances, and I know everyone like talks to me about Bond stuff, but like Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson, I kind of liken them to the, you know, when you go 10-pin bowling, and if you're a kid, you put up those little barriers at the side. They're the barriers, right? They want you to get a strike, right? And we know that the Skittles are down there. They don't mind how you get to the Skittles, but they want you to get to the Skittles. And what they don't allow you to do is go into the gutter, right? And it's brilliant because they employ people to do the job that they want you to do and let you do it. But they don't let you waver too far. And I think like a really good producer will do that. And I think good directors do the same thing. You know, you create an environment where people can be creative and say you love it, even if you don't.
Fantastic. Okay, let's open the floor to questions. Does anybody...
That sounds like a Squid Game. Yes, it has meant, I think, for filmmakers and program makers, it ensures a level of exposure to the material which they never had before, which means that they can kind of audition the piece before they've committed to spending the money and recording it. But I think that's true of visual effects and things as well. You know, there's a lot of stuff you can pre-vis, you can see how things are going to look. It's meant that the job that we have to do now includes a completely previously unheard of job, which was creating a synthetic version of a full orchestral score, which is a full-time job in itself a lot of the time. Whereas before, again, to refer you to the Alfred Hitchcock thing, if you played him a couple of tunes on a piano, that would be it. You could spend the rest of the time concentrating on writing the music. But now you have to do all that. It means that you... I think technology has democratized composition, and I think in many ways that's a good thing. In other areas, if you are not particularly inclined to push at the boundaries and be original, it's very easy now to make things which sound good but aren't good, if you know what I mean. You know, it's like, this sounds like music. you know, which is where AI can get you to very easily now. You know, it's like you can very easily just make stuff, which sounds pretty good, but you know, it will never come up with an alternate way of looking at something. Well, I'm saying that, it might have done by now. I mean, we've been here an hour. So. Within a year of me starting, where we just used to basically write it down. I mean, I did use a computer just because it was kind of at the point where things were turning over. But the first thing that I did was sitting with orchestrator and actually sketching it out bar by bar, instrument by instrument.
How do you hear it? Do you hear all the...
Yeah, well, this is a weird thing. It's like if I'm writing, there's kind of like two things that happen. I'll either hear the whole thing, like completely, it arrives like fully formed, and then the hard work is getting that out of your head and into a form that can be then recorded and played to other people. Or sometimes you just get fragments of things that need working out. I mean, one of the funniest things that people say to me is like, you know, sometimes if they come to the recording session or something, and they've never seen an orchestra recording something before, and they'll play the first piece, and the UK musicians, I think, are the best in the world. I mean, just astonishingly good. And without any rehearsal, they will, you know, the first time they read it, it will just be astonishingly good. And sometimes you have a guest comes in and they listen to an orchestra recording something, and they'll turn to me and they go like, God, it must be amazing hearing your work played by an orchestra. And I said, the best that I can hope for is relief. I said, it would be weird if I was surprised that it sounded like the way I'd written it. It's like if you're a playwright and you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. That's very easy to answer because I haven't. But that's the good thing about doing the next one, is that you hope that you will, you know. But on a George Martin front, well, I've worked at Air Studios, I still have a room at Air Studios. George was there a lot of the time, so I got to know him quite well. And he did this brilliant thing that on the first day of recording for a film, you get all the execs from the studios would be down, you know. And like George Martin walks in, it's like touching the hem of God's frock. You know, they all know that it's George Martin. And he used to do this thing, the first cue would come up and he would look across and he would go like, David, he goes, that is marvellous. And you go to the producer and says, you're so lucky to have him. It's like, this is so marvellous, isn't it? And of course, no one's going to say, that's a load of rubbish, you know. But he was lovely like that. He would do things like that all the time. But no, in answer to your question, I think the idea that if I ever thought that anything that I did was any good, I'd stop. So I'm trying to be better.
Where you thought, I've really put myself on the map?
Well, those things tend to be out of your control. I mean, I'm always very nervous about stuff. When things do well, it's lovely, but you can't ever really accept that you have anything to do with its success. It's weird. It's like I just did this thing with Lana Del Rey for a Bond video game, which came out last Thursday, and I had no idea how that would. I was really nervous about how people would receive it. Anyway, it turned out it's gone down pretty well, luckily. But I just feel relieved that it hasn't been despised by people. You know, I kind of want people to like it. Of course you do. You know, but the idea that it's something that you could expect or demand is I think a lot of people who write continue to write because they still think that the best thing is yet to come, and I think that's why you keep doing it. I can blame Michael Piper, who was 6 years old, and I was 6 years old, and it was the school nativity play. And our job as shepherds was to walk from the back of the hall to the front of the hall, which is the same size hall as this, to meet Jesus and Mary, right? and there was a piece of music that we had to walk in time to. And Michael Piper couldn't walk in time, and it drove me mad, because it's like, they told him 3 times that he was walking too fast. And I'm going like, this is, all you've got to do is this is the speed of it. And I was hearing different music when they were playing that, and I sort of always, anyway, I think I've always felt like I've heard music, and I had really good music teachers who were enthusiastic about it. So when I get into secondary school, and I wanted to do something with music, and there was the choir, I wanted to get into the school choir, and the guy who was the head of music at my school was so enthusiastic about music in a way that I hadn't seen a grown-up get enthusiastic about anything before. And I thought, well, he's a grown-up, and he thinks this is amazing. So, and also the fact that when you sing together, you know, it's so important, that thing that it awakes in you, you know, that sort of sense of contact, and the noise that you make, the collective noise that you make. It reminded me of when I'd been to the cinema and I'd seen films and listened to the music, and I'm thinking, like, what is that? Why do I feel like that? And I want to be a part of the thing that makes that noise. So I was always curious about it. And I think my mum had an old exercise book that I had. It said, what do you want to be when you grow up? When I was 8, and it said I want to be either a musician or an actor. And it's in a way, it's a little bit of both, you know, because you have to think of sort of actorly kind of considerations about character and why am I doing this and why is this happening, but also the musical sort of undercurrent of it emotionally is something that you kind of have to feel, and it's that weird thing of recognising feelings in music, and it's like a recognition thing, and it's the sort of thing that you can't teach people. I think instinctively people who are composers do one or two things. You can write functional music, but you can't, you know, you can teach people how to, you know, how to compose, right? You can teach people how to read and write music. But I've said, like, if you taught someone how to write nicely and spell properly and have a nice pen and nice handwriting and grammar, it doesn't mean you're going to be Shakespeare. You know, it's like, you know, you've got the tools, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got that other bit which you can't teach people. And I think that sort of style and taste. And what do I think about directors? I'm really happy. I mean, there's a director on the animation, doing some animation, kids animation. We did The Tiger Who Came to Tea a couple of years ago, which is a Judith Kerr book. And then last year we did a thing called Mog's Christmas. Anyway, we're doing another one for this Christmas called Mog's Bad Thing. And I don't know if anyone knows that story. But the basic story, and it's a brilliant idea for a book, and now it's going to be a film. The basic story is about a cat that shits on a chair and then runs away because he's worried about what the family think of it. And I thought, there's a pitch. But anyway, the director on that really likes whistling, and so I always make sure there's a whistling part for him in the score for it. But as far as I'm concerned, if John Carpenter wants to score his own films, great. You know, he can tell himself he doesn't like it. Well, it changes every day. Well, I've got a soft spot for Casino Royale because of the nature of it being a kind of reboot. And also, when I started writing that, we didn't know who was going to be James Bond. So I was writing the idea for the song just based on the story and the character, which is interesting because previously, obviously, it had been Pierce Brosnan, and you kind of get an understanding of the feel of how he is. But Daniel hadn't been cast, so I'm left with the purely literary version of him, which was, I felt, really interesting. And then when Daniel arrives, it was like, actually, this does sit in with the way that I was feeling about it. And that informed me even more. We'll probably talk about that later if anyone's going. But,
down at the Electric Palace, 7:30 tonight.
And anyway, who's my favourite? Well, it changes all the time. I'm in a Taxi Driver mood at the moment, Bernard Herrmann, mainly because the opening 15 seconds of that, I think, in a way expresses the entire film, the heart of the film. It's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do, to be able to define something by such a short amount of time. But some people could really do that. The first 10 seconds of Star Wars, you know, the first 5 seconds of Goldfinger, you know, Once Upon a Time in America, or Good, the Bad and the Ugly. You know, it's like incredible pieces of music which kind of say, this is what we are. I mean, film music in a way is like the shop window. You know, when you hear it, you think like, I want to find out what goes on in there, and I want to be in part of that world. And also, I need to understand what this world is about, and music does that as well, I think. It's the worst thing, keeping things secret. Like there's, I've had to keep things from the Olympics secret, which completely that was a year and a half of solid work, and it was insane trying to not say things that you just really want to say. The Sherlock one, you know, when he jumps off the roof, knowing what happened. Not saying anything about that for a year was horrible. The last Good Omens, which is coming out in a couple of weeks' time, not saying anything about that. And now the Lana Del Rey thing, which I'd known about for a year and a half, and it came out of nowhere as far as the world was concerned. But I'd known about it for a year and a half, and I find that really crushing. That sense of like you can't say anything. And it makes me feel a bit sick, really, because you feel like if you happen to let something out, even accidentally, and sometimes in fandoms, where people are very vocal about, and they are looking for clues, and a lot of the time they're right, not all the time, but they will see little bits and pieces and come up, and then you feel like you've let everyone down because you said something which is really innocent, or just alluded to something, and someone has kind of figured out, well, maybe that's this, and maybe that's that. And you're going like, oh my God. I mean, with the Lana thing, I don't know if you know, but about a month ago, some of her fans, who are incredibly dedicated, discovered that she had registered her writing interest on the song with a publisher collection agency in America, which I didn't know was public. I don't know if she knew it was public, but they'd done a deep dive into, what she's doing, and they found the name of the game with her name written on it. And they were going like, well, she's doing the game, obviously she's doing the game. And then there was 1,000 people going like, they would have said something. They would have said something if they got Lana Del Rey for that. They wouldn't. Anyway, that sort of went away, which was really weird. But then 2 days before they dropped, they also discovered my name next to it. But we were close enough for it not to worry so much. But I find all that really difficult. I just don't like it, it's like, because then when people honestly ask you, you have to lie, and I don't want to lie. If anyone doesn't know temp scores, it's when you've made a show or a film, and in order to make it more palatable for people to watch work in progress, they will put pre-existing pieces of music in as a kind of placeholder in order for you to feel like it's more complete. The problem that you get with that is that sometimes they can't divorce themselves from that piece of music, and it feels like it has to be that piece of music. And then sometimes they will say, can you do something a bit like that? Which is unpleasant, because you don't want to be copying anyone, but hopefully you have you've conceived of what you want this to be. And that's when you kind of have to say, fine, like Good Omens, right? The opening of Good Omens originally was the Buddy Holly song, Every Day, which ends up in season 2 quite a lot. But anyway, so they wanted that to be the opening title thing, and I think that's such a waste of an opportunity, because I like writing themes for things, and I think that comes from growing up in 60s, 70s, where you had classic TV themes, or the British ones, whatever it was, like Tomorrow's World, or Howl, or Magpie, or you had Ironside, or Kojak, and Columbo, and amazing, sort of theme tunes. Z-Cars, and the Sweeney, and the Persuaders, amazing stuff. Not like now where you get 10 seconds of bum, and you're in, and also skip title, all that stuff. I think it's a big part of what it should be. Anyway, so sometimes people love temp stuff and you can't get away from it. But the thing with, I said to the guys when we were doing Good Omens, I said, I've got an idea for a theme, can I just at least do it and play it for you? And if you like it, if you still like Buddy Holly, it's cost you nothing, right? Just give me a couple of days and then I'll play it to you, and if you like it, if you want to use it, great, because I think it's the key to the entire thing. So they said, sure, so I did it, and they came back, played it, you know, everyone's in the room, and they just turned around and goes, no, that's Good Omens. So that's what it was from that point on. And the whole show from that point on, actually, what that did was unlock the possibilities musically of that show completely, because we are not tied, we're not having to recover from that musically. You know, that sets something in motion which you would then have to recover from in order to get to the next place creatively. So it unlocked all that, and then the only guidance I got was like, it could be even weirder. You know, you could. I said, like, what about if we do this? What about if we do that? And I was like, yeah. Everything was yes. And the weird thing is, it was a show that supports everything. It's so everything in itself that, you know, it's like that first one. We had, I don't know, dozens of different sort. I mean, the amount of instruments that I bought and learned to play just to go to, you know, like bass harmonicas for 10 seconds, you know, but stuff that just go like, yeah, of course it's like that, and all of a sudden it works. It sits there and it fits there, and it goes like, that belongs in that world where anything can happen. Sony got very nervous about it because they were thinking, hold on, we've got a James Bond movie and we've got the James Bond theme. And my argument was that he earns his theme. If that arrives fully formed at a point before he has become the James Bond that we know and expect, then the jeopardy of him not making that grade is removed. Because as soon as you hear that theme, you go, oh, it's James Bond. It's the James Bond that we know, and the whole baggage of everything that he's ever been is attached to him. But in that film, he makes mistakes and things go wrong and he doesn't get it right. So I kind of updated a few sections in order to keep Sony a little bit happier. And also it made sense dramatically that every time he did something which was kind of what James Bond can do, that we recognise, like he wins the DB5, he has to mind in a game of cards. When he did that, he earns a little bit of the thing. When he flies into an exotic location for the first time, there's a little bit more. When he puts the tuxedo on for the first time in the mirror in the bathroom that Eva Green has made him wear, and he's looking at himself, and we see him in the tuxedo for the first time, he earns a little bit more. Yeah, I'd say most of it. I'd say most of it. And I think that sometimes when you're doing a show, you have to feel confident in what you're doing. And I weirdly, it's not a matter of trust, because it feels like it arrives, and it's like, I feel like what I'm doing is spotting something that's already happening. You know, I'm just kind of recognizing it. Yeah, a lot of it survives. When I did Independence Day, I was having a problem with a cue for when the aliens arrived. I don't know if you know that film, but there's a bit where there's like these giant spaceships turn up. Anyway, and I was like, it's all a bit, I couldn't really quite get it. And I had a dream that I was in the LA Guitar Center, and they were demoing a new synthesizer, right? Big new synthesizer, and I thought, wow, this is great. Anyway, it had demos on it, presets, like Foxtrot, Bossa Nova, Alien Invasion. Right? And I thought, I wonder what that button is. Pressed the button and it played this bit of music, and I thought, that's pretty good. And I woke myself up and I sung it into a cassette tape, and that's what's in the movie. Which is why I can't take credit for these things. What's your favourite thing? It always feels like someone else, Weirdly, it feels like it's come from somewhere else. Sometimes you get, like, again, going back to George Martin, I saw a documentary where he was producing something that Paul McCartney was doing. Paul was kind of spent about an hour messing around with the bass guitar, just playing away. Anyway, he comes in the control room and George says, play it back like 15 minutes and 34 seconds. Listen to this, and there was a bit, he was just going boom, ba-ding, ga-ding, ga-ding, and George says, that's something. That little bit is something. in an hour of noodling, you know. And so Paul says, all right, leave it with me. Sits down at a piano. I can't wait another day. Like that. And song arrives out of that moment that had been saved by George, you know. So sometimes it's not always a conscious thought. It's sometimes that, you know, the idea of taste and style is be able to recognise when something works and doesn't work, and that's a feeling. I know that someone says, what makes a Bond song a Bond song? I don't know if you know, but there's something about the feeling about it. You know, you can apply a lot of different things to it, strings and brass and stuff, but there have been plenty that haven't been like that. And if you think that, you know, Goldfinger doesn't sound like The Spy Who Loved Me, and Spy Who Loved Me doesn't sound like Live and Let Die, but they're all Bond songs, and we recognise them as such, and there's a feel, isn't there? How can Roger Moore be James Bond as well as Daniel Craig be James Bond? But they are.
Amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. David Arnold.